So today we're going to start a series of tutorials that will demonstrate some real-life web test automation with OpenTest. I think we can all agree that, while Hello World tutorials are nice, they're in the end not all that useful. So what we will do today is we will demonstrate some real-life scenarios using a site called todoist.com, and this is the website. I'm actually logged in. Let me log out. So what we are going to do is we are going to create a test that will navigate to the homepage of todoist.com. We'll click on the login link, enter the username and the password, and then click on the login button. And we'll take it from there in the next videos. So let me log out now. All right, so let's get started. So first thing we gotta do is, I always like to create a directory where all the files will go, just to stay organized. So we'll make a directory called OpenTest on the C drive, and we'll cd into that directory. Before we do anything, make sure you have OpenTest installed. You can do that by typing OpenTest-v, and you should get the version number that you have installed. If you don't have it installed, please follow the installation tutorial and then come back here. All right, so we have the directory created, we are in the directory, so now we can execute the command OpenTest quick start. And what this command does for us is, let me go to the directory, it creates these three directories, right? The test actor configuration file in a separate directory, the server configuration file in a separate directory, and then an initial test repository with some dummy tests. When we are doing web testing, first thing, we have to prepare a test actor that is capable to do web testing. So let's go into the test actor configuration file. Let's open it with VS Code. By the way, I highly recommend VS Code as your text editor for OpenTest. Some other editors are going to do a pretty good job also, but in my experience, VS Code is just perfect for just about anything you want to do with OpenTest. So the things that we want to change in the test actor configuration file is the actor type. I think we want to call this web, because we are going to do web testing at the end of the day. The sync server URL is correct. We are going to run the sync server on our local machine here, and sure, we are going to use Chrome, so that's good. And the Chrome driver exe path is the path to the Chrome WebDriver executable, which is correct on my system. I actually have a directory called Selenium on the C drive, and in this directory I have some driver executables for some browsers here, and this is the one that we are going to use in this test. Save. And now what I would like to do is I would like to modify the name of this directory to reflect the type of actor that this one is, and this is web, a web actor, which is why we're going to call it actor-web. So now that we have this done, let's copy the path and let's actually start the actor. So we're going to change directory into the working directory of the actor, and we're going to start the actor by typing OpenTest actor. And of course, this actor will have no server to connect to, because we haven't started the server yet, which is why we're getting this error, cannot connect to local host refused, whatever, right? So let's start the server. To do that, we are going to go into the server directory, to copy this path. We're going to start a new command prompt, and we're going to cd into the server directory and say OpenTest server. Now that the server is started, we are actually ready to run some tests. But first, let's verify that we can access the server correctly. Localhost 3000, the server is running. Perfect. And we can see the web actor, right? This is the type, the actor type that we just set in the configuration file for the actor. Good. So let's get started with our first test. So we are going into this OpenTest directory, and this is our test repository. If you go into the server configuration file, you will see that it actually points to this directory as the test repo directory. And of course, you can change this to point to any test repository you like on your local machine. So let's close these files, and let's now open the test repository with VS Code. So we're going to open the root directory of our repo with VS Code. We have some tests here already, some web tests too, which we're going to use as the starting point for our test. So let's copy this first sample test here. Let's put it in the root. And let's actually delete everything else in this sample test repo. And we will name this test Todoist login. All right, this is how the test looks like right now. So let's change the description to say Todoist login. Then the actor type that we are going to use to execute this test is going to be web, not actor1. So we're going to change this here. And now let's actually put the test actions that we want to run. So first thing we want to do is we want to navigate to the home page. So we want to navigate to the Todoist homepage. So we change the description of this action. By the way, this is just a human readable description that we put in here to help people figure out what our test does and to help ourselves later on troubleshoot why a test failed. It's not necessary to put it. You could even delete it altogether like that if you want. But I recommend you always have this description in there because it will help you a lot. All right, then the action we want to execute is the navigate to action. Now, whenever you write a test, one thing you want to do is you want to open the documentation. So we're going to open Firefox and navigate to get-opentest.org. And in here, we want to go to the Selenium keywords reference. And the keyword that we are using right now is the navigate to. So you see, if we didn't have that sample test already, you could just copy and paste the test action from here, from the example. Good. So we are navigating to Todoist.com. Let's save this and let's run this test just to make sure we have everything set up properly. So for that, we go to the OpenTest web UI and we click this little plus to create a test session. We're going to say what tests we want to run. We only have one test, so we'll click that. And we are also going to name this session Todoist smoke tests, let's say. And then we'll click on create session. So our session started. This actor is the one executing it. That's perfect. So let's wait for the browser to appear. Okay, Chrome started. It navigates to the Todoist.com website and then closes. And our test has passed. Everything is fine. All right, so now we can go ahead and write the second test action. So the second test action we want to run is we want to, let me go here, Todoist.com. So we want to click on this login link, right? So we can right click on it, we can say inspect, and we can try to figure out what a good locator would be for this element. Now we can see this element is implemented as an A tag, and it doesn't have an ID, doesn't have a name. I think the thing that best identifies this element is probably the href attribute, right? This link points to the user's show login URL, and I bet there is no other element in the page that does that. So of course, the other thing we could do is we could identify the element by the text that it contains. I'm not sure this is a good way to go, because what if they change the text into something else, like sign in instead of login, or who knows what. So I always want to go by the things that are most likely to stay the same, and I think the href in our case is that kind of element. So let's do that. Let's first put a test action here to click on an element, and if we go to the documentation again, let's go back to the top of the page. The SendKeys, sorry, the click action is the one that we need. So we want to click on the link. So let's go to the documentation for click. We copy this sample test action definition and we put it in here. Of course, with the YAML file, you have to be really careful with indentation. So we'll select these lines and press tab however many times until these properties here, action and args, are aligned with description. They are all part of the same object which represents a test action definition, and those properties need to be aligned. If you have another space like that in here, this will not, this will fail, right? This is not a correct test action definition, so make sure they are perfectly aligned. So we want to click, let's fill in the description for this action. Click the login, and it's a link, not a button. Login menu, let's call it menu. All right, and we are clicking, and now we have to say what element we want to click, and we have to populate this locator here, right? In the sample, we had a locator that was using an ID. As we saw here, there is no ID we can use. What we can use is this href attribute. So let's create a CSS selector, and we say that we want to click on an A element which has an attribute href equal to, and let's not, oops, let me copy this. So this is how this selector will look like. And one thing I would like you to remember is that YAML doesn't require you to enclose strings in double quotes. So for example, this value here, the name of the action I want to execute, is a string. I didn't have to put double quotes here like that, because YAML knows that if I have a colon and a space, then the next thing after that is the value of the property I'm populating, and if it starts with anything that is not a number, it can recognize it as a string. So I don't have to put the double quotes. But in this case, when I'm specifying this CSS property, I have to enclose this value in double quotes, because this value contains this square bracket characters. And square brackets are special characters in YAML that can be used to define an array, just like in JSON. So because of that, I have to put this string in double quotes. Otherwise, YAML will get confused. Save this test and run it again. So the browser started, and It navigated to todoist.com, it clicked on the login link, and now it closed, right? So this test works. The one thing I need to do is, you see, every time you put a new action here, you go through the same process. Start the browser, navigate to todoist.com, click on the login, and so on and so forth. And this can get pretty boring after a while. So to avoid this lengthy process, what OpenTest allows you to do is it allows you to change a configuration property in this actor configuration file, actor.yaml. So let's open the configuration file. And in the Selenium section, at the end here, you have this reuse driver configuration. What this means is that by default, the actor will create a new WebDriver every time you start a new test. However, you can also say reuse driver true, and when you do that, the test actor will start reusing the instance of WebDriver that it already has instantiated, which means it will not start a new browser, it will use the existing one that it has already created, the existing browser instance, right? So let's save this configuration file, and because we changed the configuration file, we'll have to restart the actor. So Control-C 2 times, and we do OpenTest actor again. Now the actor started, so let's run this test again, and I will show you what happens. The browser gets created, we navigate to the todoist.com, we click on the login link, but this time the browser is not getting closed because we changed this configuration in here, right? If I go to the OpenTest web UI, I see that the test session completed, but my browser still is still not closed, and the test actor actually keeps a reference to the current WebDriver instance that points to this browser, which means that I can be much more effective when writing my tests, because now I already executed the first 2 steps in my test. Now I want to execute the third one, which is I want to type my email address in here, right? Which means, so I'm already at this page, I don't need to execute the first 2 steps again, which means that I can go into my test and I can comment out the first 2 steps. The way you comment out things in VS Code is you select the lines you want to comment and you press Ctrl/. And if you forget what the shortcut is, you can find it in here, Ctrl/. On a Mac is Command/, I believe. But you can always look it up here if you forget what it is. And if you keep pressing Ctrl/, you toggle between comment and uncomment. And this is really, really helpful. So in our case, we are already at the login window. We don't want to execute these 2 test actions. What we want to execute is a third test action, which will enter the username and password. I mean, the third test action will enter just the username in here. So let's see, how do we identify this element? Let's right-click, say inspect. Okay, where is it? Let's do this. Click and inspect. All right, so this is an input element. It actually has an ID, which is nice. We will use this ID to select the element. So let's see what else. Oh, all right. So see, this this input element is not in the original page. It's actually in an iframe element, and iframes are just like little browsers inside of a browser. So before you can identify, before you can select any element in an iframe, you first have to switch your test to that iframe. and I will show you how that's done. So all right, and actually things are even more complicated, as we see here, because this iframe is in another iframe. So we have an iframe, another iframe in that first iframe, and then we have our dialog box. So yeah, that's not a very nice web page to test with, but let's do what it takes to test it nevertheless. So what we want to do is, so initially when we are on this page, we are here in the main HTML page. So first thing we want to do is we want to switch to this first iframe. Then from here we want to switch to the second iframe, and I kind of lost it. Where's here? We want to switch to the second iframe, and now that we are finally in the iframe that contains our email text box, we can actually type in the email. Good. So let's switch to the first iframe. So this is our first iframe. I see that it has a name, which is probably the best way to identify it. So if we go to the documentation, we go to the top again, and we have this switch to iframe test action that we can use. So there are two examples here. One identifies the iframe by name and one by a regular locator. So let's use this one that identifies the frame by name. And let's put it here. Let's indent these lines properly. Switch to the well, let's call this switch to the first iframe. I don't know if that's the best description. And the iframe name is GB_frame. We save, and before we try the test, let's put the next action to switch to the second iframe. And this one, let's see, this second iframe is best identified by its ID. See, for some reason for this one they used an actual ID. So let's use the ID. And okay, so for this switch to frame action, we are actually going to use a different strategy. We are going to use a locator to identify it. And locators are just objects that have to define one of these properties, ID, CSS, text, if you want to identify an element by text. And you can find them all in the documentation. If we go to the top, if we go to UI element locators, those are all the types of locators that you can provide in OpenTest. So as you can see, there's quite a lot of ways you can identify an element. Of course, you want to first use this type of locator. So the locators are actually arranged in the order that you should be trying to use them. So if your element has an ID, the best way to locate the element is by ID, like that. If it has a name, the best way to identify it is by name, like that. And so on and so forth. In our case, the element has an ID, so let's do this locator. So the ID is actually GB_frame. So we should be good here. And what I like to do is I like to space the locators like this to make them a bit more readable, in my opinion. And now we are finally at the point where we can actually type text into the login dialog box. Where am I here? Let's close this window. So this is actually the browser window for my WebDriver. So let's open it. remember, this window is currently being controlled by the WebDriver instance, which is used by this test actor here, right? So this test actor, when it executes a test action next time, is going to execute it in this browser window. So this is nice, because it's like this is like I paused the test and I have the time to modify whatever I need and then continue from where I left off. So all right, so the next test action, we'll have to type in some stuff into this email text box. And if we go to the documentation, go to the top again, the test action that we want to use is SendKeys. So a little bit about the documentation. Whenever you see a test action argument defined in bold letters like this means this test action argument is mandatory. The other test action arguments defined in regular font are not mandatory. However, many times you will see that you have to provide at least one of them. Like in this case, I could either provide the text argument to type in a string of text, or I could type in I could use the key argument to type in a special character like enter or control or shift. In my case, I want to type in my email address, so I'll use the text argument. So let's actually copy this example. This is always the easiest way to write tests. I like copy and paste. So let's select these lines, let's indent them properly, and let's set the description. Type the email, type email address in the login form. All right, and we're running the SendKeys action. The locator, let's see, how do we locate this? Let's right click again, say inspect. So it's an input element with an ID of email. All right, so this should be easy. I can provide a locator by ID, and my ID is email. The text that I want to type is my email address. And then the password, sorry, we'll get to the password afterwards. And I don't want to type enter at the end, so I'll simply remove this argument. So now that I typed in my email address, I also need to type in the password. Type the password in the login form. And the text that I want to type is my password, which is todo5935. Don't hack my account, please. Just kidding, I'm going to change it after filming this, after recording this, of course. So let's right click on inspect. So this password is best identified. Great, so we have an ID, right? So that's what we will go by. So the ID is password. Good. We'll save the test and let's run and see how it performs. Now, I have these two test actions commented out, which is fine because by the time these two test actions execute, I expect to be exactly in this page that I'm looking at right now. So when I run this test, it will first switch to the first iframe, then inside of that it will switch to the second iframe, and it will type the username and password, and that's exactly what I want to do. So before I run, I want to make sure that I switch the context manually to the main web page. So I just click on this HTML here just to make sure that Chrome is in that context. And now let's run the test and let's see what's going on. The quickest way to run a test session that you already ran before is to just click on this little menu here and say duplicate. And then just click create session. OpenTest will automatically increment this number at the end here just for you to be able to differentiate between the test sessions. So we'll do create session, And let's wait. See, OpenTest typed the username and password, the test passed, and everything's good. So the last thing we want to do is we want to click on this login button. So what I'll do is I will now comment out this section of the test, because remember, now I know this works fine, so I don't want to waste time executing it. I will only put in the test actions that follow after that, which in our case is clicking on this login button. So let's see how this is identified. So this is an A element. It doesn't have an ID, doesn't have a name or anything. So I think the most useful thing we have in here is this class of type submit button. I don't know what this is. So yeah, let's use the class to identify this control. But you know, submit button is a potentially very common class name. Maybe they use that for some other controls in the page. And in order to make sure we don't fail, we'll have to give this some additional information. So let's go by submit button first. So let me copy, where did I have the click? Let me copy this click action and put it here, uncomment it, and now we'll change it into click the login button in the login form. And we'll identify the button by CSS. Let's leave these double quotes because we'll have some square brackets inside, so we cannot get rid of them. Actually, I don't know if we'll have square brackets, so let's just start from scratch. So I want to identify an A tag with the class submit button. So let's copy this submit button. However, I want to give it a little bit more information. So let's also tell it what is the parent of this button. So see, the parent is the form with ID login form. So if I put this ID in here, now I know for sure, oops, see, YAML thinks that I commented out this line, because in YAML hash marks are the beginning of the comment. So I am forced to use double quotes again. That's fine. So what I said here is I said that inside of the login form I want to identify an A tag with the class submit button. So now I know for sure that we will click on the correct button. So let's save this test. Let's make sure that we are where we should be. Okay, so I just typed the password. So now I can run this test, which again, remember, we'll just run this one single test action. So I duplicate the test session again. I start a test session, and now let's look at the browser, see what's going on. It clicked the login button. All right, let's close the Chrome Developer Tools. Everything looks perfect. All right, so I think we have a working test. So let's close this browser. Let's change back the test actor configuration. So the reuse driver, I will say reuse driver equals false. You never want to work with reuse driver equals true in production, by the way, right? So always change it to false in production. In development, it's a very useful feature, but in production it can cause a lot of headaches. And now, of course, I have to restart the test actor. Let's uncomment all these test actions in my test and save. And let's run this test to see what it does. So let's duplicate the test session again. and wait for the browser to start. Navigated to todoist.com, clicked on the login, typed in the username password, clicked the login button. It navigated to the next page after that, and then of course it closed, because that's what it should do. So after every test, the test actor cleans up the WebDriver instance to prepare for the next for running the next test. All right. There's a couple of things in this test that are not exactly production ready. Like, for example, when you put locators like this in your test, you run the risk of your test failing in the future when the application changes. But I think we got everything we wanted to do for this first session. The last thing I wanna do is with any real life test automation project, you want to make sure that you work with source control, right? I cannot emphasize this enough. Don't ever try to write automated tests and not put them in source control. I don't want to go into details of why that is, but believe me, it will help you a lot. And I think most of you that worked in test automation before already know the reasons why. All right, so before we do anything else, let me just clean up some other things here that we don't need at this point, that were created by our quick start command. All right, so now we have a very simple test repo with just one single test file in the tests directory. By the way, the name of this directory is mandatory. It has to be named tests, and that's how OpenTest knows where to look for when it displays the list of tests in here. All right, so let's put this under source control. So we are going to open a command prompt. In VS Code, you do that with control tick mark. I think it's here somewhere. Here, integrated terminal. So from the root here, we do git init to create a new Git repository in here. And now that I've done git init, I could create the commit from the command line here, but I actually think VS Code has a pretty nice user interface that allows you to avoid typing too much. So if you go into this section here, source control, you can stage this file in Git. You can add it to the staging area, and then you can create the commit. So how should we call this? Create a login test, login sample test. Perfect. So let's commit this, and we are done.